Okay, we just finished photosynthesis, and that can be a very, very difficult topic. And now we're going to talk about cellular respiration, which is kind of misleading because cellular respiration isn't really about breathing. It's about making the energy that you need from food that comes from plants. And so basically this is the reverse of photosynthesis. It makes ATP molecules for energy for you. And so it requires certain things. Number one, it requires oxygen, which is a waste product from plants, and it needs glucose, which comes from the plants you eat. And as a result, cellular respiration makes energy. It gives off a waste known as carbon dioxide, which you breathe out, and water. And so this is the reason that you breathe, and it is the reverse of photosynthesis. So here we just have a quick diagram here. The glucose from the food and the oxygen you breathe go into your mitochondria to make energy for you. Glucose is broken down slowly into steps, and that allows energy to be captured and used to make ATP. And so there's coenzymes, coenzymes that join with hydrogen to help make this energy. And it involves redox reactions, and we really don't need to get into all of this or the formula, but the main thing to remember is that cellular respiration takes glucose from plants, the oxygen you breathe in, it gives off a waste of carbon dioxide, it also gives off water, but it gives you the energy you need. So just kind of the overall picture of cellular respiration. There are different phases of cellular respiration, and part of this takes place in the mitochondria, some takes place in the cytoplasm. And so just check your study guide to look over the main points that we need to know. But basically, glycolysis is the beginning that produces glucose, and these molecules NADH and FAD, or FADH2, it goes through what is known as the citric acid cycle that pumps out electrons for the electron transport chain that makes ATP for you. Okay? So overall, with cellular respiration, 34, 5, you have 38 molecules of ATP that are made, or energy that is made for you. So the two parts, I really would say three parts: glycolysis, citric acid, and electron transport chain. I really haven't heard too much of this preparatory reaction myself. Glycolysis, it takes place in the cytoplasm. Glucose is broken down into two molecules of pyruvate, which has 3 carbons. We're not going to get into all these different steps. For the test, glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm. Glucose, 6 carbons, is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvate, or 3 carbons. I'm pretty sure I had that on the test. This is just getting into a lot more detail than I think that we need to know. So outside the mitochondria, oxygen is required for the complete breakdown of glucose in aerobic respiration. When you don't have oxygen, you go through a process known as fermentation, and it's an anaerobic process that breaks down glucose, but you only get 2 ATP molecules. And the pyruvate is reduced to lactate. You get a brief burst of energy for muscle cells, but the recovery from oxygen deficient complete when enough oxygen is present to completely break down. So this is where if you're out of shape or you're working out and you get pain in your side, you're not getting enough oxygen, you're having a buildup of lactic acid, and you're not getting as much ATP made. You're getting a very short amount for a very a quick burst. Microorganism fermentation. Bacteria use fermentation to produce lactate or other organic acids and alcohol and carbon dioxide. This is on the test. Yeast, carbon dioxide makes bread rise, ethanol made into wine and beer. So fermentation is without oxygen. Bacteria use it to make lactate. They use it to make alcohol. Alcohol has yeast. Carbon dioxide helps make the bread rise, and ethanol made into wine and beer. So again, you're only getting two ATP molecules. You are not getting very much energy at all. These are all the molecules that are needed to kind of make this cycle go. Talking about glycolysis, you're only getting 2 ATP as a result of glycolysis, and it happens outside it happens in the cytoplasm membrane outside the mitochondria. So talking about fermentation, you're not having enough oxygen, you're only getting 2 ATP, and you're getting pain in your side because you're getting lactic acid building up. So it can go two ways. Fermentation can go into lactate, making lactic acid, or it can go into ethyl alcohol for alcoholic fermentation. And again, this is just getting into a lot more that we need to know. I think the big takeaway is anaerobic. There's no oxygen. It can lead to fermentation. It can lead to lactic acid buildup. In a person, you only get 2 ATP. Fermentation can also lead to ethyl alcohol and alcoholic fermentation, but again, there's only 2 ATP. Inside the mitochondria, I can't zoom in here. So we talked about the mitochondria, and we talked about all these different folds inside the mitochondria. All these different folds just give increased surface area for these reactions to occur. So the cristae is the little hairs inside this membrane, and it allows the location of the electron transport chain. And the matrix, or the inside, is where the citric acid cycle is occurring. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading. Okay, the preparatory reaction, again, this is something that I've just never really dealt with before. The citric acid cycle, you need to know that it occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. And again, I think the other thing that we need to know, I'm just trying to read over all this and trying to help summarize it, but I think the citric acid cycle, it produces ATP, and 2 cycles are needed for each glucose molecule to be made. Okay, so again, the preparatory reaction, I've really never heard of this, but we have glycolysis that works out in the membrane, in the cytoplasm, away from mitochondria. We only get 2 ATP. The citric acid cycle will produce 2 ATP, and this is basically these NADH and FAD, they're kind of like cars to carry electrons to the electron transport chain, and the electron transport chain is what is used to produce large amounts of ATP. 34 ATP just coming from the electron transport chain, so you have 38 ATP total that are made. I think that's the big picture. Here's this really confusing citric acid cycle. Basically, it's producing carriers to carry electrons to the electron transport chain, and it's making 2 ATP. Look over your study guide. I think that is the main gist of what I had on there. Inputs of the citric acid cycle, these are just different molecules that are needed to make 2 ATP. And this NADH and FADH2, they're kind of like cars that carry these ATPs, or electrons, to the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is located in the cristae of the mitochondria, so those little folds. It's a series of carriers that pass electrons from one to another. And I kind of mentioned this NADH and FADH2. Their molecules are kind of like a car that delivers the electrons for the electron transport chain. So it's located in the cristae in the mitochondria. It's a series of carriers that passes electrons from one to another. And these two molecules, NADH and FADH2, deliver the electrons themselves. As pairs of electrons pass from one carrier to the next, energy is released, and this will be captured for ATP production. And the final electron acceptor is oxygen, which forms water. So this is kind of a picture of the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain happens in the cristae, this purple area of the mitochondria. These are proteins. And basically, you have NADH and FADH2. They're kind of like a car or carriers of these electrons as they come through the electron transport chain. What happens with all these electrons? ATP synthase is a protein, and it's in the membrane, and it kind of acts like a wheel or a pump. And it is used to pump hydrogen ions out through the gradient of the protein, and as this protein turns, it produces ATP or energy. So here again is just a big picture of cellular respiration. We know that it happens in the mitochondria. It happens in the inner space, the cristae. They're kind of like little hairs. Inside this membrane, we have electron transport proteins. NADH and FADH2 are kind of like cars that bring the electrons through this chain. At the end of the chain, we have a protein called ATP synthase. It takes adenosine diphosphate and an extra phosphate, and it joins them together with these electrons to make ATP that you need. That's kind of the big overall picture. And so we basically just have, again, showing the flow of electrons. The hydrogen ions accumulate in the inner membrane space. They are used in the ATP synthase. It's kind of like a wheel to make those ATP molecules themselves. Energy yield from glucose metabolism, a maximum of 38 ATP are made. Some cells make only 36 ATPs or less. 36 to 38 ATP and a 40% of available energy in a glucose molecule. The rest of the energy is lost as heat. And so here you kind of have the breakdown of the ATP yield. Some alternative metabolic pathways. Cells use other energy sources such as proteins and fats, and fatty acids can have longer carbon chains and they will yield more ATP. And intermediates can also be used to make other products, and extra food is made into fat for storage. So fats are used to make energy, is basically what it's telling us. So we have proteins, we have carbohydrates, we have fats and oils. All of this is used to turn the citric acid cycle to run the electron transport chain to make ATP for you. Again, I know that that was just a really brief, quick whirlwind. We could take a week or more talking about this. Look at your study guide. Look at the big picture items. I think you'll be able to see that I'm just looking for the big picture, not the real tiny formulas. And then just let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you all in class on Wednesday.